I was supposed to do a reading at some point, but I didn't see it on the order of service, so we're going to do it now. It's from Eric Butterworth's In the Flow of Life, and it is called The Effusion of Light. We are living today in a complex and changing world. If there is one thing one needs more than anything else, it is light. Light in terms of insight into self, guidance along life's way, knowledge of the secrets of the universe, and the wisdom to use light and not abuse it. The clearest thinkers the race has produced have always seen the course of their lives as the quest for light. It is said that Goethe, who spent his life on that quest, gasped the last words on his deathbed, "More light." And yet, invariably, the search has been out there. We have thought of light in terms of ideas and innovations or the minds that gave birth to them. His followers saw Jesus as the light instead of the one who gave evidence of the true light that enlightens everyone coming into the world. It is true that he said, "I am the light of the world," but he also said, "You are the light of the world. Let your light so shine." Humankind forever stands at the crossroad of human experience, and the darkness of fear and indecision is overwhelming. Which way to go, what to choose, who or what to vote for. One of the chief causes of strain is living in the awareness that even little decisions can influence our whole lives. Some persons puzzle over the question, how can we distinguish between divine guidance and human will? The very question implies a duality, a sense of God out there who would or could desire for you something contrary to your personal desires. Divine guidance is not an exterior force acting upon you. It is the seed of your divinity, the Christ of you, seeking to fulfill its pattern in the outperforming process of your life. God could never want for you that which you don't inherently want for yourself. So your mind is your kingdom and has no boundaries. The free flow of ideas and creativity is your inheritance. It is important to begin acting on the belief that you can dip into that process anytime, manifesting guidance and light in creative and imaginative ways that are beyond human knowing. And I chose that just because we're talking today in our continuation of the Advent season. I'm talking about that star that I asked the kids about. And just that inner light that we have within us that we know as intuition. I'm getting ahead of myself. What does the star represent? Intuition. Oh, you're good. And ironically, I didn't recognize that the star plays a central role in the telling of the story of the wise men, and that most of us have to drive some ways to even be able to see the stars anymore. And if we were to tell the story today, there would undoubtedly be a GPS involved. I would definitely book a flight. I'm not getting on a camel. The gifts would likely be a new iPhone and some earbuds, and if we take moderation, if we put ourselves into the story, it doesn't work as well as taking the story and putting it within ourselves as representing parts of ourselves. And so David's done a great job of setting us up the last 2 weeks with his talk about angels among us and how we have often had those people appear in our life just when we needed them to give us assurance or guidance. And it might be in a fleeting moment. And reminding us as well that we are called to be angels in other people's lives as well. And then last Sunday, asking us to consider for ourselves how we make room and take time to nurture the birth of Christ consciousness in our own awareness. And I understand what that means, and I'm sure you do as well, but I wanted to get very clear about that because it can be confusing, again, to sort of equate ourselves with Jesus and or to think that there is something in us that could rise to a level above what we're calling the Christ consciousness. Now, if I haven't confused you by saying that, excellent. Because I found two authors that I go to a lot that really clarify, that say things that are very profound very clearly. And so I want to say that, I want to share them with you. The metaphysics that I looked at for the story of the wise men and the star came from Reverend Mark Hicks, who writes on truthunity.net. I encourage you to look at that. He's got great work on there. And he says this about the 7 passages that comprise not only the gospel Christmas narrative, they also comprise a narrative of our awakening to the Christ presence within. And this is what I wanted to distinguish. Know that it is not the Christ that is born, rather it is our awareness of the Christ that is born. Christ is eternal, as are we. And to say it really more clearly, Reverend Ed Rabel, is Phyllis here? No, she loves to quote Ed Rabel, who's a long time, an old school teacher at Unity Village at the school for ministers, and he is quoted as saying this to his students: "Get that straightened out now, folks. Christ is not born in anybody. Christ is what makes it possible for things to be born. Christ is the allness of you. It is the something in you. It is not something in you. Christ is really the totality of your wholeness and of your perfection. It is the sum total of all that is real about you. All that is true, not an entity within you, which could make you at some point greater than that entity or greater than Christ." That's what I was trying to say. You are not greater than Christ. Christ is your greatness, your wholeness, the totality of you. So that's an important distinction when we visit this scene every year, and it holds a level of sentimentality. Even if you didn't grow up in a traditional Christian church, we're culturally Christian. We know of this scene, yes? And so as we begin to contemplate what this story says about what's going on in us and in the evolution of our own consciousness, our own awareness of this allness of us, I think it's important to make that distinction. So was that helpful? Okay, excellent. I just want you to know this is taking all of my energy. Okay. And the story of the wise men is a great one. And in revisiting it, I was reminded that, first of all, we don't know that there were necessarily 3. We know that there were 3 gifts. So we concluded no one's going to bring 2 gifts on a camel. There were 3. Wise men, they're referred to as kings. They're also referred to as magi. And it's commonly thought that they were what we would call astrologers. They studied the sky in correlation with great happenings. And they undoubtedly knew of this prophecy of this king that was coming, this Messiah. And it was said that they would know him by the star, and the star emerged, and so they, being the wise guys that they were, followed the star. And they actually went to Jerusalem first, but the angel had forewarned Joseph and Mary, thank you, to leave. And so they go and talk to King Herod and say, "What do you know about this newborn king?" And of course he doesn't know about it. But he's intrigued, of course, because he's the king. And the Romans and the Jews have a long history of that point of struggle. So he says to the wise men to go find him and tell me where he is so I can go worship him. So they follow the star, and it is said that the star stops and stays right above the child, and so they find him there with his mother. And can you imagine? It is hard to imagine, but if all that you've gone through, you have gotten your best robes and your best stuff, and you've followed a star across the desert, and lo and behold, there it is. It's happening. So they fall to his knees, and they deliver the gifts. Don't leave yet, it's going to get better. Now, what we want to say about that, so that's a fantastic story in and of itself. And if you are going to be born the Messiah, there's going to be a fantastic entry story that is worthy of retelling. And what does that say about us? I know that I personally haven't had, I'm not going to say that. Let me give you the metaphysics of it, and then we'll look at how that sort of plays out in us. So according to Mark Hicks, who says it very clearly, the wise men represent all of our accumulated wisdom and experience of our soul. And when we talk about our soul, it's all the levels of awareness. Our conscious mind, our subconscious mind, our superconscious mind that can grasp divine ideas. So all the ways that we have become aware. And our wisdom. And in this way, it's talking not about intellectual smarts, but the wisdom of the soul, the wisdom of intuition. Thank you. I'm so close. It starts with an I, of intuition. And here's the thing. When you think of intuition, when I think of intuition, I often just think of, I know that gut feeling that you're supposed to pay attention to. And I was also reminded, just like we have to drive to see the stars, so many of us are not really in touch with our feeling nature, with our embodiment, as we would call it. I know that sometimes when I'm in the throes of busyness and my mental stuff, and I get still, it's usually yoga that does it, and before I know it, I'm weeping, and I'm like, whoa, where was this? There's so much going on that we hold in our body. And some of us will willingly say, I can't get still. I don't want to feel that. And we need to pay attention to that and spend some time in a empathetic and nurturing way with what is coming up that we're holding in our bodies. And if we don't do that, we miss these signs, these intuitive callings that are so important. And what came to me out of the story that I'm supposed to be telling you is the power of intuition. I think the truth of intuition is always guiding us to that Christ awareness, to that Christ consciousness, in every way that we will let it and pay attention to it and follow it. And that includes shining the light within us sometimes to look at things that are difficult. I was reminded when I was putting together this talk, our MVC condensed intro, that was 10 weeks put into 5. Woo! It was a fabulous class, but every time I do that work, I marvel at all that's going on in me that just seems like it's this interaction. I'm having a little hard time with this interaction. You know, they tell you to bring a story that's not like a 10. It's not going to put you in the fetal position to talk about, but it's alive. You're struggling with it, and you bring that, and all that, when you're willing to look at it, that's behind that. It starts out with some judgment. Well, if they would have just da-da-da, that's a favorite. And then, oh, well, why am I so judgmental? Then I'm back to breaking me down. And then I finally get to actually what happened after I break through of that. And then, I'm going to go back here to judge, because why did that even happen? I mean, it's this marvelous dance before we can even really get to, here's what I'm feeling and here's kind of what I need. And that's really put simplistically, wouldn't you say? But it makes me say, wow, if I'm not even aware sometimes of all that's kind of going on in me, and then I think I know what you should be doing. Hello. Yeah, we had this conversation the other day in my household because I was getting this, there's so much laundry down here. Who isn't putting this laundry away? Why is all this laundry down here? I don't leave my laundry down here. And Heidi wisely said, I find that when I start saying, who isn't doing this, there's usually something I'm not wanting to do. So I went ahead and did my laundry. So all of that is to say that everything comes back to sort of within us, and particularly this searching for this heightened sense of consciousness, this heightened sense of awareness of who we are, and we do inherently know it, don't we? When we get still, finally, even if it means we have to give up the ghost about who didn't do what, we stop that, and get still, there is that within us that knows so much more and that will guide us so much more elegantly than we often do of our own will. And so, metaphysically, back to the story. The wise men represent all of our wisdom that is really looking at our spiritual wisdom, our intuitive sense of knowing, and also said to be the voice of God within us as the source of our true understanding. And they come from the east and they head to the east. The star was also in the east. And anytime the east is mentioned in Scripture, it refers to within, going within. So we could say that the wise men saw the star in the east. Where is it? And so stirred by inner revelations of truth, they followed the star, the intuition, to the Christ child, which it, of course, was illuminating right over the babe, who was probably not a babe by that point. So I wonder for us what stirs in us to continue to seek the truth of that Christ consciousness and that awareness. And think for yourself, what are your stars, if you will? Many people talk about going to nature, getting to nature to get kind of recentered in where we are and all that is supporting us. And oftentimes, big revelations come in that environment. Oftentimes in meditation, in times of stillness, but we have to consciously make time for that, don't we? And I feel like it is always calling to us, and it just depends on how loud we let the other stuff cover it up. So there's another important player in this story, and that is King Herod, who thankfully does not make an appearance in the beautiful scene because he's not the nicest of guys. But he is important in our awareness of ourselves, for King Herod represents the ruling power of our outer personal consciousness, dominated by intellectual control. Anybody relate to that? And quite literally, you can think of when the light shines for us to sort of go into this introspection or to follow this guiding spiritual awakening within us, which is step by step. It's not, whoa, we're done. It's in every moment of every day. Sometimes it gets louder, sometimes it gets softer. But as we get called to pay attention to that and to follow that, this Herod part of us says, oh, no, that's silly. You're not going to follow a star across the desert? Yes, right. What happened when you did that last time? You're not going to make any money at that. Remember how hurt you got? All that stuff that comes up to protect us. It's smart. It's smart, and it wants to be the king of us. The story goes on to say that because the wise men returned a different way, they did not go back and tell Herod where the babe was, that he put out the decree to kill all young male children in the area of Bethlehem. And scholars debate whether that really happened, but it certainly could have. And I love what, again, Mr. Ed Rabel says about the King Herod part of us, that he represents the destructive and negative tendencies of selfish egotism. The person does not drop that. We don't just abdicate just because Jesus or spiritual awareness is born. Spiritual awareness is born in part of us, but in other parts, selfish egotism still holds sway in certain areas of our human nature and in our life. And it feels this newly born spiritual awareness to be a threat to its domination over the entity, over us. It has become used to being king. It likes being king. And he goes on to say this: the slaughtered innocents at the hands of King Herod symbolize the newly embodied potentials in us killed out by negative impulses. These new ways of being rising to higher levels of consciousness, higher levels of expression, are threatened by that part of us that is threatened by it. This is what I love what he says too. This is not a one-shot deal in history. In many of us, this is a daily occurrence. A new possibility, a new potential for something is there, but the Herod part of us is quick to slaughter it. Now, that's uplifting, I know. Here's the good news. And he goes on to say, I don't want to read it, but the truth of the matter is nothing can kill the Christ child, which we have said is the allness, the eternalness of us. And so that's the strength that we stand on. And also I would say from my work with MBC, it doesn't do any good to attack that part of us. That's just going to be self-struggle. But to notice it, to befriend it, oh, interesting, something's going on that you're not liking, that you're wanting to control. Just the awareness of that opens up a whole nother possibility, yes? So are we clear? The three wise men represent all of our spiritual wisdom and all of our soul's awareness. And what's interesting, it goes into great detail, that includes the whole race of humanity. We all are sharing in that. We all are influenced by that. Some would even say past incarnation. So all of this story as it is unfolding, and it's still unfolding, we are still unfolding in our awareness of the truth of who we are. Yes? Okay, excellent. The star, in any time we're talking about east, it's inward. And what I want to say about the importance of intuition that I think I already said is that I really feel like when we are in tune with that guidance, it is always guiding us to our next level of understanding of the truth of who we are in this incarnation. And it makes what we're doing here, in my opinion, worthwhile. I mean, we can get so, it's the most wonderful time of the year. See parents just... it's a great time to think of that, how we let all of that take over what it's really about and what it's about every day. I have a final reading that was brought to me just in time. It talks about intuition in a little more modern lens, talking about actually Albert Einstein. It's coming from Feminine Genius by Sylvia Silver. And it says this, where do I want to start? We have come to worship Einstein's brain and his intellect. I mean, not like the kings worship Jesus, but we do think of him as this intellect. We've come to worship Einstein's brain and his intellect and to assume the great intelligence is intellectual intelligence, that great genius is intellectual genius. All the while, it is true that many of Einstein's discoveries were in the intellectual realms of reason's theory. All right, that was all NyQuil. NyQuil read that whole sentence. And while it is true that many of Einstein's discoveries were in the intellectual realms of reason's theories and ideas, his true genius was in his ability to open not just his reasoning mind, but his intuitive mind as well. Einstein sported not just intellectual intelligence, but intuitive intelligence. Intuitive intelligence comes to us as a set of sensations, emotions, longing, urges, impulses, and images, all felt in the body. Intuition is less used and less understood as a trusted source of intelligence, partly because it is prelingual, meaning that our intuition comes first in your feeling. And then afterwards, you may be able to put words and meaning to it. Intuition is unruly and vast, rarely literal, and shies away like a wild horse when we try to break it with reason and rules. Although often hard to understand, wily to work with, and easy to disregard altogether, your intuitive intelligence is no less genius than your intellectual genius. In fact, without it, your life will never be your own. As Bob Samples writes in his book, The Metaphoric Mind, A Celebration of Creative Consciousness, Albert Einstein called the intuitive mind a sacred gift. He added that the rational mind was a faithful servant. It is paradoxical that in the context of modern life, we have begun to worship the servant and defile the divine. None of us in this room. Although we have positioned Einstein as the model of intellectual genius, he was actually an intuitive, faithful servant to all that is. And I think if we thought about that for very long, we could acknowledge that it seemed to be divinely inspired intelligence, discovering a law that was already there. And so I love that idea that intuition makes our life our own. Even as we discover and grow into our Christ consciousness, we are not going to demonstrate as Jesus of Nazareth, nor should we try to. Those lessons were his to demonstrate and to teach with. But as we come into it for ourselves, we express that through the individual life that we live and through our connections, through our work, through our relationships, all of that. So the good news is you don't have to walk on water. But I'd love to. I think it would be pretty cool. But bring the bar down to where you are, what's really going on in your life, and how you can follow that guidance to know that it is wanting to express through you, individually through you, that Christ consciousness.